Peter Dutton did an interview with the Weekend Australian that was published on Saturday, start of a 3-day weekend for most of the country, so it's okay if you didn't read it. I'm going to read you 3 paragraphs that apparently justified all of the outrage that you've just heard and all of the lies, the Medi-scare lies, style lies that you will hear between now and the next federal election. Direct quote. He is committed to zero emissions by 2050, but clearly 2030 and 2035 targets are not going to bind a coalition's energy future, that being the legislated target that Anthony Albanese has set. Instead, Dutton says, I'll go to an election saying, look, net zero is locked in stone, no question, but how we get there, that's up for people to debate. The direct quote that again set the hair on fire. Well, they, Labor, just have no hope of achieving their targets. And there's no sense in signing up to targets that you don't have any prospect of achieving. Oh, wow. Are you shaking in your boots? Does this sound like the guy who doesn't believe in climate change, that's just going to start up a nuclear reactor on everyone's backyard? Third paragraph. We're not going to destroy agriculture. We're not going to stifle investment. We're already seeing investment being withdrawn. We're not going to create sovereign risk with our export partners, as Labor is going to do with Japan and Korea. Mind blown! Can you believe he said any of this? How outrageous! He's not saying he doesn't believe in climate change. He's not saying climate change is crap. He's not saying, hey, let's all just start smoking coal. Like, seriously. Those are the 3 paragraphs that informed the headlines, which of course were all spun by government spin doctors to pretend that they're going to pull out of the Paris Accord. But again, they assume public holiday, you're not really paying attention. A few people are going to go, he's going to do what? And then, of course, once a lie has left the stable, it, of course, is treated like absolute truth by those wishing to spread the lie. Dare I say, misinformation that they would want to ban from the internet if it was about them. Cue the PM.
Peter Dutton is worse than Scott Morrison on climate change. He is all negativity and no plan.
Nah! Yeah, he's got a plan. You don't like the nuclear energy plan. He's got the same destination of net zero 2050. The interim targets of 35 and 30 are all movable. And remember, none of it applies to China till 2030, and they pollute more than much of the Western world. And even if we achieved everything the Greens wanted to do, guess what? Climate change would still affect all of the things that they are particularly concerned about, because China would produce all of what we take out of the atmosphere in about 2 weeks. Misinformation. I've got the receipts. Don't worry, I'll show you. Now, guess what happened after the freak out of the past 24 and 48 hours? They came forward and clarified. Now, this, of course, will be referred to as a backflip by the media who printed Labor's lie. Ted O'Brien, who is, of course, the climate change alternative for the LNP, he'd be the climate change and energy minister. Quote, we remain committed to Paris and to net zero. Any shorter-term targets will be informed by the state of our economy, the trajectory of our emissions, and our suite of policies. So what the hell has the past couple of days been about? Someone somewhere read an interview with Peter Dutton in the Weekend Australian and went, aha! They spun it up into he's going to pull out of this international agreement, and if so, make himself completely unelectable in any seat in the country that understands or cares or believes or knows about climate change. And thus being all of the country, he will reduce himself to a man who loses his own seat, and no Liberal will ever be elected ever again. Only problem is, I read you exactly what was said. There is no reference to the Paris Agreement. The target conversation is about the federal government's target, which they have set. Paris didn't set it. The UN didn't set it. The Australian government sets it, which means we can dial it up and we can turn it down. That's the reality of being a sovereign country. Now, again, as I was sceptical about last night, I didn't quite fall in for the idea that this was definitely going to be the policy because, of course, I went back and read the document. It's taken me, 15 minutes on telly to explain all of it, but that arms you with the information the next time somebody tries to spread this garbage, when inevitably lefty Laura Tingle, who, of course, is telling us that Peter Dutton's policy on immigration, which is slightly harsher but essentially kind of the same as the government's to cut the number, that will cause riots in the street, you know, the people who will be bidding in auctions will be turned upon by racist thugs. She, of course, will turn around and repeat this idea. It was the messy weekend for the Liberal Party as they were in and out and hokey-pokey and were they and weren't they on the Paris Agreement. That's why I'm taking as much time to tell you that when you read that, when you see that, when you hear that,